In this three-part video, you will learn about how to find bills and trace them as they pass through Parliament. In the first part, we will look at what bills are and how we identify them. In the second part, we'll look at how bills are passed, and finally, in the third part, we'll learn how to follow a bill through Parliament. Now let's follow a bill. Please note that there can be exceptions to the process. Older bills will pose problems, and you will often get stuck. Just ask for help if you do. We're going to walk through the tracing of a bill in the House of Commons, but before we start, let's recap. For a bill to pass, it must be read 3 times. Normally, a bill is sent to a committee for consideration after the second reading. The committee will look at the bill in detail, receive outside testimony if needed. They report back to Parliament with their recommendations. Once the report has been considered and the bill has been read a third time and passed, it is sent to the other chamber for consideration, and that chamber needs to pass an identical version of the bill before it can become law. Our first step is to go to the parliamentary website and navigate, as we are tracing a bill through the House of Commons, over to the House of Commons and then click on Parliamentary Business. From Parliamentary Business, you'll want to click on Legis Info, and you'll wind up here. Legis Info is a bill tracing tool maintained by the Library of Parliament. It tells us how far the bill has gone, lists the various steps in its passage, provides different versions of the text of the bill if many amendments have been many changes have been made. It links to debates and sittings during which the bill was considered, and is good for any legislation passed after 1994. But the earlier years, the closer you get back to 94, the less information there is and the fewer links there are. When you look at Legis Info, note the parliaments and sessions on the right. This is the first step you must take. You must find your bill, and it must be in the right session. Remember, the bill numbering starts afresh each session, so if you want a Bill C-34, you've got to make sure you have the right Bill C-34. This Bill C-8, for instance, introduced in October 2020, addressed a recommendation found in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report. This C-8, on the other hand, from 2004, established Library and Archives Canada. Same number, different session, different bill. The first reading takes place at a preordained point of the day when the House addresses what are known as routine proceedings. During this time, government bills are introduced, private members' bills are given first reading, and a number of other things take place. We're going to watch from its inception to passage by the House of Commons, Bill C-13. The date tells us that it is the 42nd Parliament first session, and so we click on it. And we find, indeed, the bill. And listed under Legis Info is a link to the sitting where we had the first reading, which happened on April 13, 2016. So we click on it, and we wind up with the debates for that day. We want to select from the right routine proceedings, because that's where bills receive their first reading. There, we may need to look around a little bit if there were a number of bills being introduced at that point. But eventually we'll find it. There it is. We have the motion for leave to introduce the bill, in other words, to give it its first reading, and it's deemed passed. Now we have to wait till the bill is called down for second reading. How the decision is made as to when it is called and in what fashion, at what time of the day, and so on is something that happens behind the scenes and need not concern us here. But this is where the real debate starts, and in this case they debated Bill C-13 for 3 days. Now, government bills get debated during the government orders part of the day. Many other things happen as well under government orders, and this is in fact what takes up most of a sitting day. And if we were to look at our calendar of a typical week in Parliament, we would see that most of the time is spent on government orders. Private members' bills get debated during the private members' business part of the day. 1 hour per day is set aside to debate private members' business. It could be a bill, could be a motion, or whatever. Only one item may be debated during this time, and so there's not a lot of opportunity to get legislation through if you're a backbencher. And this is one reason why very few backbencher bills get passed. Now remember, our Bill C-13 is a government bill, so when we begin our second reading, we go into government orders. The second motion normally contains a committee referral, and when we look at the debates, we get the start. And the debate can be quite acrimonious. At the end of it, there will be passage, at which point we now go and look at the committee material. So when we click back we go back to Legis Info, we will also get a list of times and dates where the committee was considered the bill. So when we click on Sittings, we'll wind up here, and at this point we can actually look at the committee homepage. We're in a different part of the parliamentary web space, and we can look at and hear, we can read the transcripts, we can look at whatever motions were made in the minutes and so on, and we can also see who testified and when. Often the people who testify are very important in the legislative research process. Normally they work for government, but quite frequently outside individuals are invited in or have an opportunity to speak. Eventually, the committee will conclude its deliberations and it will report its findings to the House. Sometimes they simply say, this looks good. Sometimes they recommend some changes. Sometimes they make more drastic recommendations, and rarer still, they recommend the government not move forward. Regardless, the report is submitted, and at this point, the House of Commons considers their recommendations, and after they've done that, they immediately move to a third setting for the third reading, which always starts off with a motion. Having been considered or read 3 times at the end of the motion, and this, by the way, is usually the most acrimonious part of the debate process, the motion is agreed to or defeated, the bill is deemed passed, and if it does pass successfully, it is now sent to the Senate, where it undergoes essentially the same process, and we can also use Legis Info to follow it over there as well. That, in a nutshell, is how we use Legis Info to trace bills. But what now? Well, your first step will be to go to the YUL Canadian Government Information Guide, pick Parliamentary Proceedings. You can get an overview of the details, what we've talked about here in brief, and there's a lot of information there, but you may still be stuck. And so if you are stuck, you can always reach us in a number of ways. Good luck, and once again, ask if you run into difficulties. That ends this video. Thank you very much.